Un Boutu bois. A Boutu bois is a wooden club in Creole. Bois in French is wood or tree. So a Boutu bois is a wooden club. Now the word Boutu bois is associated with the weapons that the Caribs or Kalinago used during warfare. So let me tell you a tale. Have you heard of the story of Robinson Crusoe, or the tale of Robinson Crusoe? Robinson Crusoe is about a European adventurer who traveled to the Caribbean or the West Indies and was marooned or stranded on an island where he encountered so-called cannibals. Apparently, this all took place in the small island of Saint Lucia, because the author, Nichols, was one of the 67 men who were on the ship, the Olive Blossom, when they got stranded in Saint Lucia. On his return to England, he wrote a small details about his travels and what he encountered, called an Hourglass of Indian News. So John Nichols was one of 67 men stranded in Saint Lucia on their way to Guyana, sent by Sir Olive Leigh, who chartered the boat to go and relieve his brother who had asked for help while he was setting up a colony or settlement in Guyana. On their way to Guyana to bring stocks and provisions, they got lost, found themselves in Barbados, and then from Barbados allegedly went up to Saint Lucia. But when you consider this, Barbados is lower down in the southern Atlantic or southern Caribbean than Saint Lucia. So in other words, they would have had to have passed Saint Lucia on their way to Guyana and reached Barbados and then returned up. But it's possible that they could have seen the mountainous regions, because Saint Lucia is a very mountainous island, from Barbados on a clear day. Or while heading to Barbados, they must have seen the mountainous regions or the mountains of Saint Lucia. Anyway, John Nichols encountered what he called the natives of Saint Lucia and wrote a story, like I said, called An Hourglass of Indian News, or Hourglass of Indian News. It is said that written here, a true and tragical discourse showing the most lamentable miseries and distressed calamities endured by 67 Englishmen when they traveled and was stranded on the island of Saint Lucia, on their way to a plantation in Guyana in the year 1605. They did not find said place, and for want of supplies, they left ashore in Saint Lucia an island of cannibals, or men-eaters in the West Indies. So basically, this was the description of the book or the story written by John Nichols, being part of the company who was heading to Guyana. So yes, if you've heard of the story of Robinson Crusoe, a very famous book, Robinson Crusoe, about a man traveling and gotten marooned and stranded on an island and facing man-eating cannibals. Well, John Nichols and the crew of the Olive Blossom found themselves, or Olive Branch, found themselves in St. Lucia in the year 1605. After being there, it is said that they were set upon by the Caribs, and not long after that, out of the 67 men that landed there were only 19 of them left. The story goes on that they found a way, they did a truce, and then they left St. Lucia and headed to Cartagena, or down to the southern coast of the Americas, South America, and eventually found their way back into England. But like Chinua Achebe said, until the lion has his historians, who is a Nigerian poet scholar, Chinua Achebe, until a lion has his historians, then the history will be written by the hunters. So the Caribs of Kalinago thus were painted as cannibals. So it is also said that when you do some research, that during the 17th century, the whole idea of the natives in the West Indies and the Caribbean were cannibals, and that was almost like a they used this to justify taking their land and enslaving the people, because this was a narrative that was widespread. Even today, when we think of Kalinagos and Caribs, the natives, we think of cannibalism. But this story tells you that this gentleman was on a ship, got stranded in Saint Lucia. They were on their way to make settlements in Guyana, which were also Guyana have a big native population, and they were there to take the land. If you notice, in 1609 as well, there's the Charter of Virginia. Well, 1606, 1 year after, they'd written a charter for Virginia to head to the New World and appropriate or take over those lands. So it's a possibility that the Kalinago or Caribs were just fighting for their land, and in so doing, so ferociously were branded as cannibals or man-eater. But the story of John Nichols and the Olive Blossom getting stranded in Saint Lucia and being set up on Caribs, he wrote this book, and then tales after that ended up being the story of, there were stories written from that, and that's how you get Robinson Crusoe. You also have stories of Friday. Friday is actually, there's a Akan name for naming children born on Friday. So you can see there's tidbits of reality or encounters. And they were also, in those days, the Caribs were taking captives. Also African slaves or people enslaved who had got run away or gotten stranded. There were Portuguese, Spanish people who were shipwrecked, who were captives by the Caribs. And so in his book he says that Friday escaped and joined him while he was stranded on the island. But so the story itself gives you a tidbit or look into what was happening, but it doesn't completely give you the truth. So that is why it is important to dig into those documents and try and understand it from a perspective of a local knowledge and mesh what is written with what is locally known. That's why we started off with the idea of a Boutu, which is a club that was used by the Kalinagos or the Carib, but it also finds itself in the Creole language as Boutu, a club. So here we go, a story about a club, a story about Robinson Crusoe and John Nichols, and stranded on an island 67 Englishmen, the Olive Blossom, on their way to set up a colony or settlement in the Guyanas. So this is the story of John Nichols, and you could say popularly known as Robinson Crusoe, the story of Robinson Crusoe stranded and encountering cannibals or man-eaters. So, idikwi kwa. Stay tuned. Don't forget to, if you enjoy the content, hit the like button, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you again.